Hey guys, welcome back to TFD. Hope you're all doing well. Now, time and time again, we see the same pattern from major media outlets and WNBA beat reporters when they cover the league, Unrivaled, and these ongoing CBA negotiations. There's one glaring issue sitting right in front of everyone, and they keep refusing to talk about it. The clear conflict of interest. And when I say keep refusing, I mean almost every single time they get the chance. Until now. For months, respected sports platforms have danced around the obvious. The fact that Unrivaled's co-founders are directly involved in CBA discussions alongside the Players Association and league ownership was either brushed off or treated like it didn't matter. ESPN, Front Office Sports, and others largely ran cover for the players, pushing one-sided narratives and betting that fans wouldn't notice, or wouldn't push back. That's why the two journalists we're about to talk about deserve some credit. For the first time in mainstream coverage, someone finally said the quiet part out loud. Before we get into that, real quick, make sure you like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps. All right, let's rewind for a second. Earlier this season, Breanna Stewart told ESPN that her involvement in both Unrivaled and the WNBPA wasn't a conflict of interest at all. In her words, it actually helped highlight areas where the WNBA could improve. She pointed to Unrivaled's TV deal, its scheduling, and the constant fan engagement. 3 games a week, nonstop visibility as the new standard players expect when they return to the league. But the wording mattered. Stewart said, it's not a conflict yet. Not yet. As if the line only exists once everything fully blows up. Fast forward to now, and fans are finally asking the questions the media avoided. When Nafisa Collier publicly clapped back at a fan, shout out to Evelyn, it made one thing very clear. This conversation has become uncomfortable. And here's the key point. The conflict didn't suddenly appear. It's been there the entire time. The only difference now is that people are finally willing to acknowledge it. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. Breanna Stewart is the president, whatever the exact title is, of the WNBA Players Association leadership. Nafisa Collier is the vice president. At the same time, they are co-founders of Unrivaled, a separate professional league that directly benefits if the WNBA experiences a lockout. And these are the same two individuals leading CBA negotiations on behalf of the players? How is that negotiating in good faith? Someone please make that make sense. Now, fast forward to Nafisa Collier's response the following morning, July 5th. I'll even give her some grace. Holiday weekend, fireworks, maybe emotions were high. She reacts by framing the criticism as some wild conspiracy theory, that fans believe she and Stewie are intentionally trying to force a lockout that would somehow reduce WNBA player income year-round. But here's the problem. That's not a conspiracy. That's basic economics. If there's no WNBA season, fans of women's basketball will still want to watch professional women's basketball. Where do they go? Unrivaled. If WNBA players suddenly have nowhere else to play, where do they go? Unrivaled. Scarcity creates leverage. Scarcity creates value. That is not an opinion. It's business reality. Now, remember earlier we heard talk of exclusivity. We'll pay you, but you play here. Now imagine the WNBA owners come back and say, fine, we'll meet your demands. We'll offer the $2.5 million contracts you're asking for. What happens to Unrivaled? It becomes far less relevant overnight. If that doesn't raise red flags, I don't know what does. And it wasn't just fans pointing this out. Sophie Cunningham openly acknowledged the conflict. That matters. To be clear, Stewart and Collier are phenomenal players. That's not the debate. The issue is governance, incentives, and credibility. When leadership personally benefits from one outcome over another, the conflict of interest is undeniable, no matter how uncomfortable that truth may be. So, credit where it's due. Shout out to Cassandra Negley and Caroline Fenton. Pretending there's no conflict of interest here is absurd, because there clearly is one. Let's finally talk about it.
What do you make of the idea of the conflict of interest between Napheesa Collier and Breanna Stewart and the interest of Unrivaled may not necessarily aligning with the interest of the W?
Well, Fee and Stewie are not only WNBA players, they are on the executive committee. So as is Kelsey Plum, she's playing in Unrivaled. 3 of the 7 people on that board who can now vote for a strike are part of Unrivaled. That is not necessarily a bad thing. I think the thing about conflict of interest, though, is just the simple fact that you as a person have interests that conflict with one another. Yeah. The key thing is just keeping in mind that that is there. The facts of it are Fee and Stewie run this league that makes them money. There are players who played in the first season who have equity in the league who are able to make money off of this league, right? And that's the thing, is just to keep it in mind that these are 2 different things. If we want to go all the way back, like players have been playing overseas the entirety of the WNBA. That is also a conflict of interest because, as we know, the schedules overlap. You have to make decisions, all of these kinds of things. But to say that there is no conflict of interest is absolutely ridiculous, because there is.
Of course there is. You can say that you'll take your personal interest out of something, but we're all human, right? Like, these biases exist. You can't always totally and completely take maybe a personal interest out of something else. Is it a concern of yours, though?
It's always going to be a concern of mine, no matter what we're talking about. And I say this, like, obviously as a journalist, right? Like, this is kind of the number one thing. So I always am concerned that it becomes a part of it. You know, I would hope when you're talking about Stewie and Fee that they understand that as well and can compartmentalize that just like athletes do for anything. But it is certainly a part of these talks, and it cannot be overlooked.
Wow. Just wow. Let's properly acknowledge what deserves recognition here. The Hoops 360 podcast from Yahoo Sports, hosted by Cassandra Negley and Caroline Fenton, did something that has been sorely missing from WNBA media coverage. They told the truth plainly and without fear. When the question of conflict of interest came up, Negley didn't dance around it. She said it directly. Yes, there is one. Absolutely. And that level of honesty has been almost non-existent throughout these negotiations. What makes this moment stand out is how glaring the contrast is. For months, most WNBA media members refused to touch this issue. Not a word, not a question, not even a disclaimer. That silence has been one of the most embarrassing aspects of this entire CBA process. We are talking about negotiations that could shape the league's future, potentially trigger labor stoppages, and involve massive financial implications. Yet, the most obvious governance concern was treated like a taboo subject. Now, consider this from the owner's perspective. If independent observers and journalists can clearly identify a conflict of interest, how do you think ownership views it? They're looking at a Players Association leadership committee that includes individuals with direct ties to an outside league. In fact, the president of the union is now actively involved in another professional basketball project. That same leadership has the authority to authorize a strike. From a business standpoint, that's alarming. And here's where it gets more serious. What happens if owners decide they've had enough? What if they say, fine, let's lock them out. No revenue sharing, we're done subsidizing losses. That wouldn't be symbolic, it would be strategic. A lockout would immediately test solidarity. Because then the real question emerges: who holds the line? When players are faced with the choice between principal and a potential 9 times salary increase elsewhere, alignment will fracture quickly. We'll find out very fast who is truly committed and who isn't. Yes, players may vote for a strike, but a lockout changes the math entirely. At that point, crossing an imaginary picket line becomes a personal economic decision, not a collective one. And players like Caitlin Clark understand this. Sophie Cunningham understands this. You can hear it in how they speak. They're not naive. They recognize incentives, leverage, and conflicts of interest when they see them. So again, credit where it's earned. Hoops 360, Cassandra Negley, and Caroline Fenton showed real journalistic courage. They asked the uncomfortable question and gave the honest answer. And frankly, the rest of WNBA media should take note. This is what serious coverage looks like.